My mother doesn't want you here. My husband said it so quietly that no one around us noticed. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and delivered the sentence that would end our 22-year marriage. You're an embarrassment. For a moment I honestly wondered if I'd misheard him. The late afternoon sun reflected off the white marble entrance of the Dallas Country Club, where my sister-in-law Lauren's wedding was about to begin. Guests in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos flowed past us laughing as a string quartet played somewhere inside. I wasn't standing in front of the ballroom because I was late. I was standing there because security wouldn't let me enter. My name isn't on the guest list, ma'am. The young security guard had apologized. There must be some mistake. I smiled politely. I'm sure there is. I had expected Ethan to fix everything with one sentence. Instead, he became the mistake. My mother doesn't want you there, he repeated, adjusting the cufflinks I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary. Why? His jaw tightened. She thinks you'll make people uncomfortable. I've barely spoken to anyone in months. That's not the point. Then what is? He sighed as though I were the difficult one. Victoria, you're an embarrassment. The words landed harder than any scream ever could. Not because they were loud, because they were calm, calculated, final. I stared at the man I'd loved since I was 23 years old. The man whose first business proposal I'd rewritten overnight because he was too nervous to present it. The man whose father I'd quietly helped refinance after the family nearly lost everything during the recession. The man whose entire family believed he was their hero. He couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Behind him I saw my mother-in-law Eleanor greeting guests beneath an enormous arch of white roses. She looked radiant, proud, happy. Why wouldn't she? Just 3 days earlier, I'd bought her dream house, an $8.8 million waterfront mansion in Naples, Florida. She thought Ethan had paid for it. Everyone did. No one knew the money had come from me. I never corrected them. That had always been my mistake. I see, I finally said. Ethan looked relieved. I knew you'd understand. No, I understood something entirely different. I pulled out my phone. He watched me carefully. What are you doing? Replying. I opened our text conversation and typed one word. Understood. I pressed send. Then I looked up and smiled. I hope Lauren has a beautiful wedding. Without waiting for another word, I turned around and walked toward the parking lot. I didn't cry. Not yet. The valet brought my black Mercedes around within minutes. As I settled into the driver's seat, I finally allowed myself one long breath. 22 years. Gone. Not because of another woman. Not because of money. Not because we'd stopped loving each other. Because somewhere along the way, my husband had stopped respecting me. Those are two very different things. Love survives arguments. Respect survives silence. Once respect dies, everything else eventually follows. I started the engine but didn't drive away. Instead, I sat there watching guests arrive. Families posing for photographs. Grandparents hugging grandchildren. Little girls carrying flower baskets. It looked like every perfect American wedding I'd ever attended. Except today. I wasn't family. At least that's what Eleanor wanted everyone to believe. The irony almost made me laugh. Because if anyone there truly knew how much of that wedding had been paid for by me, the entire evening would stop. The flowers, the orchestra, the imported champagne, even Lauren's honeymoon villa in Tuscany. Every invoice had quietly crossed my desk months ago. Eleanor had thanked Ethan repeatedly for his generosity. He accepted every compliment. He never corrected her. At first I thought he was simply avoiding awkward conversations. Over time, avoidance became habit. Habit became expectation. Expectation became entitlement. And entitlement eventually becomes cruelty. My phone buzzed. It was my executive assistant, Megan. Mrs. Bennett. Hi, Megan. You sound different. I probably do. Everything okay? I looked back toward the ballroom. No. She stayed quiet. One reason Megan had worked beside me for 15 years was because she knew when silence mattered more than questions. Finally, she asked softly, "What do you need?" I smiled. Exactly the right question. Not, "What happened?" Not, "Are you okay?" Simply, "What do you need?" "I need the number for Daniel." She didn't hesitate. "I'll text it now." Within seconds, my phone vibrated again. Daniel Brooks, senior partner. Brooks and Ellison estate attorneys. The man who had spent nearly 2 decades helping structure my businesses, trusts, charitable foundations, and asset protection plans. The man who understood one important fact. Almost everything the Bennett family enjoyed legally depended on me, not Ethan. Not Eleanor. Me. I looked at the number for nearly a minute. Then I locked my phone again. No, not yet. Anger makes expensive decisions. I had built my career by never acting while emotional. If I was going to change the course of my life, I would do it calmly, methodically, professionally, exactly the way I'd built my fortune. I drove aimlessly through Dallas, past Highland Park, past the office tower where my investment company occupied the top 3 floors, past restaurants where Ethan and I used to celebrate anniversaries. Every street carried memories. Every memory suddenly felt borrowed. At a red light, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. People rarely show you who they are during hard times. They show you during easy ones. Life had become too comfortable for Ethan. He'd forgotten who made that comfort possible. Maybe I'd helped him forget. The light turned green. I kept driving. 48 minutes had passed since I left the country club. Then 53. Then 58. I finally pulled into an empty overlook beside White Rock Lake. The water reflected the orange glow of sunset. Beautiful. Peaceful. Nothing like the storm quietly building inside me. My phone read exactly 1 hour since I had texted Ethan. Understood. I unlocked the screen. Scrolled to Daniel Brooks. Pressed call. He answered before the second ring. Victoria, it's me. I thought you'd be at the wedding. I was. A pause. That doesn't sound good. It isn't. His voice became instantly professional. What would you like me to do? I looked across the lake. For the first time all afternoon, I smiled. Daniel, I think it's time we review every financial arrangement connected to the Bennett family. There was complete silence. Then he quietly replied, I'll meet you at the office within 30 minutes. I ended the call. The sun dipped below the horizon. Some endings arrive with fireworks. Mine arrived with one calm sentence. And one phone call. The Bennett family had no idea that while they were raising champagne glasses inside the ballroom, the foundation beneath everything they believed they owned had just begun to shift. Daniel was already waiting when I arrived. It was nearly 8 o'clock in the evening, yet every light on the 26th floor of my headquarters remained on. My executive team had no idea why I had called an emergency meeting with my attorney after business hours. They only knew that if I requested privacy, I usually had a very good reason. Daniel stood as I entered the conference room. He had been my attorney for almost 19 years. More importantly, he had become one of the few people who knew the complete truth about my marriage. He studied my face for several seconds before speaking. What happened? My husband called me an embarrassment. Daniel slowly removed his glasses. I'm sorry. So am I. Was that all? I laughed softly. No. I placed my phone on the conference table and slid it toward him. He read Ethan's final text. My mother doesn't want you there. You're an embarrassment. Daniel looked back at me. After everything you've done for them? I know. He remained silent. There wasn't much left to say. Sometimes facts speak louder than outrage. 22 years earlier, I had met Ethan Bennett at a commercial real estate conference in Houston. He was charming, confident, funny. He came from what everyone believed was one of Dallas's most respected old money families. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of 2 factory workers who had died within months of each other when I was 16. After bouncing between relatives and foster care, I put myself through college on scholarships, part-time jobs, and sheer stubbornness. By 30, I had built a small but growing investment company specializing in distressed commercial properties. I wasn't glamorous. I simply worked harder than almost everyone else. Ethan admired that, at least, I believed he did. We married 3 years later. During our honeymoon, I learned my first secret about the Bennett family. They weren't wealthy. They only looked wealthy. Their country club memberships, luxury cars, vacation homes, private schools. Everything depended on refinancing old debt with new debt. They had perfected the appearance of success. Behind closed doors, the numbers were terrifying. One evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his head buried in his hands. My father borrowed against everything. How bad is it? Worse than anyone knows. Does your mother know? She refuses to believe it. He looked completely defeated. I don't know how to save them. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. Back then, I still believed we meant exactly that. Together. Satdainandam Mayofnd. Within 6 months, I quietly arranged financing through one of my investment partnerships. The Bennett family's manufacturing company survived. No one outside the boardroom ever knew why. Ethan thanked me over dinner. You saved my family. We saved them. He smiled. I couldn't have done it without you. I believed him. At the time, he believed it too. The years passed. My company expanded into Texas, Arizona, Florida, and Colorado. Then California. Then Tennessee. Every acquisition strengthened our portfolio. Every successful deal generated more income than the last. Eventually, money stopped being something I chased. It became something I managed. That was around the time Eleanor's expectations began to change. At first, she only asked for little favors. Victoria, would you mind helping Lauren with her student loans? Of course. Ethan mentioned you understand investments. Could you look over this property? Absolutely. My friend is opening a restaurant. No problem. Every request sounded temporary. Reasonable. Family helping family. Then the requests became larger. Private school tuition. Vacation homes. Medical treatments. Luxury cruises. Investment capital. Designer renovations. Every Christmas brought another expensive surprise someone expected Ethan to provide. Every Christmas. I quietly paid the bill. One afternoon, Eleanor hugged Ethan after he handed her the keys to a new Mercedes. My son always takes care of his mother. I stood 3 feet away. She never looked at me. Ethan smiled awkwardly. He said nothing. Driving home, I asked him gently, "Why didn't you tell her?" He kept his eyes on the road. "It makes her happy." "It isn't true." "I know." "Then why?" He sighed. "You know how Mom is?" I did. She loved appearances, status, recognition, being admired. Correcting her in public would have embarrassed her, so I let it go. Again, and again, and again. Looking back, every silence taught her another dangerous lesson. She learned she could erase me, and I'd allow it. Daniel opened one of the folders he'd brought. "You've personally funded 38 major purchases for the Bennett family." I stopped counting. I didn't. He slid several pages toward me. There they were. Property acquisitions, trust contributions, private loans, business guarantees, medical expenses, tuition payments, charitable donations made in Eleanor's name. Nearly every milestone the Bennett family celebrated over the past 2 decades had one thing in common. My signature. Not Ethan's. Mine. Daniel looked at me carefully. "Do you remember what I asked you when we structured these agreements?" I nodded. "You asked if I was protecting myself. And what did you say?" "I said I trusted my husband. And I told you trust and documentation should never replace each other." He wasn't criticizing me. He was reminding me. Everything had been documented. Every transfer. Every guarantee. Every legal obligation. The Bennett family simply never bothered reading the paperwork. They assumed Ethan handled everything. Ironically, Ethan assumed I always would. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas. The city lights shimmered beneath the summer sky. Beautiful. Busy. Unaware that my entire life had changed in a single afternoon. "I keep asking myself one question," I admitted. Daniel waited. "When did he stop seeing me?" He thought for a long moment. "I don't think he stopped seeing you." I turned toward him. "I think he stopped noticing the cost of everything you quietly carried." That sentence stayed with me. People often appreciate miracles, until miracles become routine. Then they call them expectations. My phone vibrated. Ethan. Incoming call. I stared at the screen. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another call. Then another. Then Lauren. Then Eleanor. I didn't answer any of them. Finally, a text arrived from Ethan. "Where are you?" "Mom says the Naples closing has been delayed. The title company won't release the property. They say there's a problem with the funding. Can you call me?" I read it twice. Interesting. The legal review hadn't even begun. Daniel noticed my expression. "What is it?" I handed him my phone. He smiled for the first time that evening. "They're already feeling the first ripple." I looked down at the growing list of missed calls. For 22 years. Whenever the Bennett family needed something, they called me. Not because they loved me, because I solved problems. Tonight would be different. Tonight, for the very first time, their problems would have to wait. I slept for exactly 3 hours. Not because I was anxious, because my mind had already made its decision. When you've spent your entire adult life making multi-million-dollar business decisions, you learn something important. Emotion belongs at home. Facts belong at the conference table. At 6:30 the next morning, I walked into my office carrying a cup of black coffee. Dallas was just waking up. My executive assistant Megan looked up from her desk. "You've got a full schedule today." "I know." She hesitated. "And your husband has called 17 times. I figured. He also came by around 6 this morning. I stopped walking. "He came here. He wanted to see you. What did you tell him?" "Exactly what you once told me to say." She smiled politely. "Mrs. Bennett isn't available without an appointment." I couldn't help smiling. "Thank you. I assumed you had your reasons." "I do?" At 8 o'clock sharp, Daniel entered the boardroom carrying 4 thick binders. Behind him came 2 senior attorneys. Then my chief financial officer, Robert. Finally, my trust administrator, Melissa. Every person sitting around that table had signed confidentiality agreements years ago. They knew the truth about my financial structure. None of them had ever met Ethan socially. That had been intentional. I wanted my business and my marriage to remain separate. Ironically, that separation was about to save me. Daniel opened the meeting. "Victoria has requested a complete legal review of every active financial arrangement benefiting the Bennett family." No one looked surprised. Professional people don't react with emotion. They react with questions. Robert adjusted his glasses. "Are we discussing suspension or termination?" "Review first," I answered. "Then action where appropriate." Melissa opened a spreadsheet. "There are 37 active obligations." "Walk me through them." She nodded. "The Naples property scheduled to close tomorrow. $8.8 million.
Correct.
The funding currently sits inside a revocable family trust awaiting final authorization. Daniel looked toward me. That authorization requires your signature. I haven't signed.
No.
Robert continued. There are also 4 personal guarantees attached to Ethan's investment company. Any legal obligation requiring me to continue? He scanned several pages. No. What happens if they're withdrawn? The banks will request replacement collateral within 30 days. And if none exists, the loans become immediately callable. I leaned back quietly. Interesting. I hadn't realized Ethan had become that financially exposed. Not because I'd never cared. Because I'd never imagined I'd need to know. Daniel folded his hands. Victoria. Yes. I need to ask something directly. I nodded. Are you trying to punish your husband? The room became silent. Everyone waited. I thought carefully before answering. No. Then what are you trying to accomplish?
The truth.
No one spoke. Finally, I continued. For 22 years, I've allowed everyone, including Ethan, to believe a version of reality that simply isn't true. Robert nodded slowly. I understand. I won't destroy anyone. I know. But I also won't continue financing people who publicly humiliate me. Daniel smiled slightly. That's a very different objective. It is. At exactly 9:42 a.m., Daniel drafted the first letter. It wasn't dramatic. No lawsuits. No threats. Simply a formal notice. Pending review, funding for the Naples property is temporarily suspended until further written authorization by the grantor. The grantor. Me. A second letter followed. The title company. A third. The escrow officer. A fourth. The estate planning bank. Everything happened according to contracts everyone had signed years earlier. Nothing illegal. Nothing emotional. Just paperwork. Funny how paperwork changes lives. Meanwhile, about 40 miles away, the Bennett family had gathered for a farewell brunch following Lauren's wedding. I didn't need to imagine it. Later I would hear every detail. Lauren was opening gifts when Eleanor's phone rang. She answered cheerfully. Then her smile disappeared. What do you mean the closing has been suspended? Across the room, Ethan reportedly looked up. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Another 30 seconds passed. Then Eleanor's voice became louder. No, that's impossible. Guests turned to stare. The money is already there. Silence. Then, what authorization? She ended the call abruptly. Ethan. What? They're refusing to release the house. He frowned. What are you talking about? They say the funding hasn't been approved. He reportedly laughed. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. My wife handled everything. Exactly. I had. At 10:15 my phone rang again. Ethan. This time? I answered. Hello. His relief was immediate. Victoria, finally. Good morning. Something crazy is happening. So I've heard. The Naples closing has stopped. I know. They're saying they need your authorization. That's correct. Long silence. What do you mean? I mean exactly what they told you. I don't understand. I don't think you ever tried to. His breathing changed. Victoria, are you angry about yesterday? I looked out the window. What do you think? I'm sorry if I didn't mean. You told me I was an embarrassment. I was upset. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice softened. My mother was emotional. So you agreed with her? I was trying to keep the peace. I almost laughed. Whose peace? Another silence. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Can you just call them and fix this? There it was. Not. How are you? Not. Are you okay? Not. Can we talk? Simply. Fix it. I closed my eyes. Ethan. Yeah. Do you know whose money bought that house? Mine. No. Silence. My company transferred the funds. He didn't respond. I personally established the trust. Nothing. I personally guaranteed the purchase. Still nothing. Finally. You're joking. I've never joked about business. He sounded genuinely confused. But everyone said, I know. You never corrected us. No. Why? Because I believed protecting my husband's pride mattered. His breathing became heavier. You mean, everything Eleanor thanked you for. I stopped. He finished the sentence himself. Was you? Yes. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. 22 years of assumptions were collapsing inside his mind. Finally he whispered, I didn't know. I believe you. Victoria. But not knowing stopped being an excuse yesterday. Around noon, Megan knocked gently. There's someone downstairs. Ethan. She nodded. He refuses to leave. I looked at Daniel. What do you recommend? He smiled. As your attorney, yes. Don't avoid him forever. And as my friend, make him wait. I smiled. For how long? He glanced at his watch. Long enough to understand what you've been waiting 22 years to receive? What? Respect. I stood and walked toward the elevator. Not to meet Ethan. Not yet. First, there was one more document waiting for my signature. The final suspension of every discretionary financial benefit connected to the Bennett family. I picked up the pen, signed my name, placed it back on the table. Outside my office window, the Dallas skyline looked exactly the same. Inside, everything had changed. By the time I finally agreed to see Ethan, he had been sitting in the reception area of my office for nearly 3 hours. Megan walked into my office and asked quietly, "Are you ready?" I looked at the clock. It was almost 4 in the afternoon. Yes. She nodded and returned a few minutes later. "Ethan's here." I took a slow breath before stepping into the private conference room. He was standing beside the window with both hands in his pockets. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose. His eyes were bloodshot. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the confident Bennett everyone admired. He looked like a man who had just discovered his life wasn't what he thought it was. When he turned toward me, I barely recognized him. "You look tired," I said. "I didn't sleep." "I did." He gave a weak smile. "I guess one of us had to." Neither of us sat immediately. Finally, he spoke. "I need you to explain what's happening." "I already did." "No." He shook his head. "I mean everything." I studied him for several seconds. Then I pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit." Daniel entered carrying 3 thick binders. Ethan frowned. "What are those?" "My records." Daniel placed them neatly on the table. "Mrs. Bennett asked me to prepare a complete financial history involving your family." Ethan looked confused. "Why?" "Because yesterday you told her she wasn't family." The room became silent. Daniel opened the first binder. "Let's start with 2008. He slid a document across the table. "Your father's manufacturing company." Ethan glanced at it casually. Then his expression changed. "This loan was funded through Victoria's investment partnership. I thought First National Bank. They only serviced the loan." Daniel pointed to another page. "The capital came from her." Ethan slowly looked at me. "You never told me." "You never asked." The second binder opened. 2011. The lake house renovation. The contractor invoices. The architectural fees. The landscaping. Paid entirely by Victoria. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I know what you thought." Another page. 2013. Lauren's graduate school tuition. Another. 2015. Your mother's heart surgery. Another. 2017. Your father's tax settlement. Another. 2019. The Aspen vacation property. Another. 2021. The Family Charitable Foundation. Another. 2024. The Naples Mansion. Every page carried one familiar signature. Mine. No dramatic music. No yelling. No accusations. Just 22 years of facts. One receipt after another. One canceled check after another. One wire confirmation after another. Eventually, Ethan stopped turning the pages. He simply stared at them. Almost whispering, he asked, "Did my mother know?" "No." "My father?" "No." "Lauren?" "No." "Who knew?" "My attorneys." "My accountants." "My board." "And you." He looked up. I honestly believed, I know. Just then, Daniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. "It's Eleanor." Neither of us spoke. He looked toward me. "Should I answer?" I nodded. "Put her on speaker." He accepted the call. "Daniel Brooks." Her voice exploded through the room. "Where's Victoria?" "I'm here." There was a brief silence. Then she spoke directly to me. "What are you doing?" "Reviewing my finances." "You've embarrassed this family." I almost smiled at the irony. "Really? You stopped the closing?" "Yes." "My furniture is already there." "I know." "The movers are waiting." "I know." "My neighbors are expecting us." "I understand." "You need to fix this immediately." "No." Silence. The kind that arrives when someone hears the word no for the first time. Finally, she asked, "What do you mean no?" "I mean the purchase has been suspended. You promised me that house." "I never promised you anything." "Ethan did." I glanced toward my husband. He lowered his head. "You paid for it." "I considered it a gift. And you made it very clear yesterday that I'm an embarrassment." Her voice hardened. "This has nothing to do with yesterday." "It has everything to do with yesterday. You can't punish us over hurt feelings." "I agree." She sounded relieved. "So you'll restore the funding?" "No." Another long silence. "I'm protecting my dignity." Without waiting for her response, I nodded to Daniel. He ended the call. Ethan buried his face in his hands. "I can't believe this." "What part?" "My mother." "Or yourself?" He looked at me. "Both." For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he asked something I hadn't expected. "Were you ever going to tell me the truth?" He nodded. "I planned to. When the day you were proud of me instead of what I could quietly provide." His shoulders slumped. "I failed you." "You did." "I kept thinking I was protecting everyone." No. You were protecting appearances. That evening, the family group chat exploded. Lauren demanded answers. Her husband wanted to know whether the Naples house was actually owned. Eleanor insisted there had been a banking mistake. Then my father-in-law Richard, who had always spoken the least, finally wrote one sentence. "Victoria, is any of this true?" I stared at the message. Richard had never treated me badly. Quiet, reserved, sometimes emotionally distant, but never cruel. I replied with a single photograph, one page from the original trust agreement. It showed my name, the funding source, the purchase amount, nothing more. 5 minutes later, Richard called. I answered. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Victoria, yes? I spent 20 years believing my son rescued this family." "I know. I'm ashamed." "You don't need to apologize for believing what you were told." "No." He sighed deeply. "I need to apologize because I never bothered asking." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it. For the first time, someone inside that family wasn't defending themselves. They were accepting responsibility. The following morning, several Dallas business publications began reporting that the purchase of an $8.8 million Naples waterfront estate had been unexpectedly delayed. No names were released, only speculation. Inside my office, however, everyone already knew the truth. Not because I announced it, because reality has a way of revealing itself once people stop pretending. Late that afternoon, Daniel returned carrying one final folder. Everything has now been formally suspended. The discretionary trusts, the guarantees, the luxury property funding, the annual family distributions. He placed the folder in front of me. Nothing has been taken from them. He paused. They simply no longer have access to what was never actually theirs. I signed the final acknowledgement, closed the folder, and for the first time in 22 years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, not revenge, relief. Because carrying people who don't appreciate you is exhausting. And the moment you finally set the weight down, you realize how heavy it really was. The headlines disappeared within 2 days. The delayed mansion closing never became a public scandal. No television cameras showed up outside my office. No reporters camped in front of my house. Real wealth rarely creates loud drama. It creates quiet consequences. Those consequences began arriving one by one. A week after the wedding, Ethan called again. This time I answered immediately. "Hello? Can we meet?" His voice sounded different. Gone was the confidence that had once made every conversation feel like a negotiation. Now he simply sounded tired. "I'll meet you." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." "Where?" "Our favorite coffee shop." I thought about it. The little cafe in Highland Park had been part of our marriage since the beginning. We had celebrated my first commercial property purchase there. We had toasted when his father recovered from surgery. We had planned vacations over cinnamon rolls and black coffee. It felt strangely appropriate. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there." The next morning, Ethan was already waiting when I arrived. He stood as I walked in. For a second, instinct almost made me hug him. 22 years of habits don't disappear overnight. Instead, I shook his hand. His eyes briefly filled with sadness. I deserved that. "Yes, we ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it." Finally, he spoke. "I've spent the last week reading everything." "What everything?" "The financial records, the trust agreements, the partnership documents, the guarantees." He looked down. "I had no idea." "I believe you." "No." He shook his head. "I mean, I had absolutely no idea how much you've done." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to add. He continued. "My father spent 2 days going through old files. And," he cried. "That surprised me. Richard Bennett wasn't an emotional man. I've seen him cry twice in my entire life," Ethan said quietly. "The first time was when his brother died. And the second, when he realized he'd spent 20 years thanking the wrong person." Ethan reached into his briefcase. "I brought something." He slid a leather folder across the table. Inside was every credit card connected to family trusts, every access card, every account authorization, every signature stamp. "I don't want any of it." "You don't have to give it back." "I'm not giving it back." He looked directly at me. "I'm admitting it never belonged to me." For a long moment, I simply stared at him. This wasn't the Ethan I'd seen outside Lauren's wedding. This was the young man I'd married. Honest, humbled, afraid. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. I should have said those words years ago. 2 days later, Richard asked if he could visit my office. When he arrived, he looked noticeably older than I remembered. He carried a small wooden box. I found these while cleaning my desk. Inside were dozens of handwritten thank you notes. Every birthday card I'd ever sent him. Christmas letters. Family photographs. I never realized something. "What?" He smiled sadly. "In every picture, He handed me one from Lauren's college graduation. I stood in the back row, holding everyone's coats, making sure everyone had water, checking reservations on my phone, looking after everyone else, never once standing in the center. You were always taking care of us. I was happy to. No, he shook his head gently. You convinced yourself you had to earn your place. His words struck a nerve I hadn't expected. Maybe he was right. Growing up without parents had taught me one dangerous lesson. If I wanted to be loved, I had to be useful. Somewhere along the way, usefulness had quietly replaced self-worth. 3 weeks later, I officially filed for divorce. The courthouse felt surprisingly ordinary. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no accusations, just signatures, paperwork, legal language. The judge looked over our agreement. Mrs. Bennett, are these terms acceptable to you? They are. Mr. Bennett. Yes, Your Honor. The divorce itself took less than 20 minutes. Walking back to the parking lot, Ethan stopped me. I know this won't change anything. It won't. I still need to say it. I waited. I'm sorry. For what? He looked toward the courthouse behind us. For confusing your generosity with obligation. For letting my mother define our marriage. For believing respect could wait until tomorrow. His voice cracked. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. I felt tears forming. Not because I wanted him back. Because I knew he finally understood. Sometimes understanding arrives too late. Life kept moving. Without my financial support, the Bennett family had to make difficult decisions. Nothing catastrophic happened. No one became homeless. No one lost healthcare. No one went bankrupt. But the lifestyle changed. The Naples mansion was never purchased. The Aspen vacation property was sold. Luxury memberships were canceled. The chauffeur was dismissed. Private jets became commercial flights. Designer shopping trips became carefully planned budgets. For the first time in decades, the family began living on what they actually earned. Ironically, they discovered it was enough. Perhaps not enough for appearances, but enough for life. So, then came the biggest surprise of all. About 4 months after the divorce, I received a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a text. An actual letter. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. It began simply. Victoria. For most of my life, I confused being admired with being respected. I kept reading. She admitted she had enjoyed telling friends that her son had become so successful. She admitted she liked the attention, the compliments, the envy. She admitted something else. I convinced myself that if people knew the truth, they would think less of my family. Then came the sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. The truth is, I thought less of you because admitting what you'd done made me feel ashamed of what I hadn't. I read it again, and again. Finally, the last paragraph. I'm not asking you for another $1. I'm asking if someday you'll allow me to apologize in person. I folded the letter carefully, set it inside my desk drawer. Some apologies arrive because people need something. Others arrive because people have finally become someone different. I wasn't sure which one this was, but for the first time, I was willing to find out. Almost a year passed before I saw Eleanor again. By then, my life looked nothing like it had before Lauren's wedding. The divorce had long been finalized. I had moved into a smaller home overlooking White Rock Lake. Friends had asked why I didn't keep the enormous estate Ethan and I once shared. My answer was always the same. I don't need a bigger house. What I needed was a lighter life. For the first time in decades, my calendar wasn't filled with obligations that belonged to other people. No emergency wire transfers. No family crises. No last-minute rescues. No pretending someone else deserved the credit. Instead, I rediscovered mornings. Coffee on the patio. Long walks around the lake. Dinner with friends who knew me simply as Victoria, not as someone's wife or someone's financial safety net. Peace turned out to be far more valuable than luxury. My company continued growing. Ironically, stepping away from the emotional weight I'd carried for 22 years made me a better leader. I created a scholarship program for young adults aging out of foster care. Whenever people asked why that cause mattered so much to me, I smiled. Because someone believed in me before I knew how to believe in myself. The first class included 12 students. The following year, 28. By the third year, our foundation had expanded into 3 states. Watching those young people graduate, find careers, and build stable lives gave me a kind of joy no business acquisition ever had. Success felt different when it wasn't measured by balance sheets. It felt human. One afternoon, my assistant walked into my office. There's a gentleman here asking to see you. Who is it? Ethan. I looked toward the window. I'll see him. He entered carrying nothing but a plain envelope. No expensive watch, no designer suit. No appearance of someone trying to impress anyone. He looked comfortable, healthier, older, wiser. Hi, Victoria. Hi. We sat across from each other. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Finally, he smiled. I got a job. I heard. He had accepted a position as chief operating officer for a regional manufacturing company. A normal executive salary, long hours, real accountability, no trust funds, no shortcuts. I'm proud of you. He laughed softly. That means more than you know. He looked around my office. I almost didn't come. Why did you? I owed you something. You've already apologized. I wasn't here to apologize. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a check. It wasn't large, not compared to the money I'd spent over the years. Attached was a handwritten note. First repayment. I looked up. Ethan, I know I'll never repay everything. I wasn't expecting you to. I'm not doing it because I owe the money. He smiled. I'm doing it because I owe the effort. That sentence nearly brought tears to my eyes. For the first time since I'd met him, he fully understood the difference between receiving and earning. I'll accept it. You will? Yes. Why? Because refusing it would rob you of the chance to become the man you're trying to be. He nodded quietly. I hoped you'd say that. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. I loved you, Victoria. I know. I think I spent too many years loving what you gave instead of appreciating who you were. I smiled gently. I know that too. He walked away. I watched him disappear down the hallway. Oddly enough, I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Some relationships aren't meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach us exactly what we need before they end. 3 months later, Eleanor requested to meet. We chose a quiet cafe far from the country club where everything had fallen apart. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She still dressed elegantly, but something had changed. The confidence that once demanded attention had been replaced by quiet humility. She sat down slowly. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I would. I wouldn't have blamed you. She folded her hands. For almost a full minute, she searched for the right words. Finally, they came. I've replayed that day outside Lauren's wedding hundreds of times. I remained silent. I wanted everyone to admire my family. She smiled sadly. And in chasing admiration, I lost the respect of the one person who deserved mine the most. She reached into her purse and placed something on the table. The house key I'd given her after closing on a much smaller home several months earlier. I don't want gifts anymore. I looked at the key. You don't have to return it. I know. She pushed it closer anyway. I need to. Tears filled her eyes. I treated generosity like an obligation. I measured your worth by what people thought of you. And I forgot the simplest truth. She looked directly at me. The strongest people are usually the quietest ones. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached across the table and gently covered her hand with mine. I forgive you. She closed her eyes. Not dramatically, just with relief. I'm not asking to become family again. I know. I only hoped I wouldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if you'd hate me forever. I don't. Hate is heavy. I've carried enough weight already. She laughed through her tears. So have I. We left the cafe separately. Not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Not as enemies. Simply as two women who had finally learned that pride costs far more than honesty ever will. People often ask me if I regret paying for that mansion. The answer surprises them. No. Because the money didn't expose who I was. Losing the mansion exposed who everyone else was, including me. I learned that generosity without boundaries eventually becomes permission for disrespect. I learned that silence can protect peace for a little while, but it often sacrifices truth. Most importantly, I learned that forgiveness isn't pretending the past never happened. Forgiveness is choosing not to let the past keep deciding your future. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. Never confuse love with self-sacrifice. The people who truly love you won't ask you to disappear so they can shine. They'll make sure the world knows exactly who stood beside them. And if someone only values you for what you provide, they're not protecting your heart. They're spending it. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of someone, or if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this encourage you to believe that kindness and dignity are never weaknesses, I hope you'll subscribe and join me for the next one. Until then, take care of your heart. It's worth far more than any mansion.